My name is Joseph Edward Smith. I'm 80 years old. I spent most of my life believing that if I worked hard, paid my taxes, stayed informed, and planned carefully, I would at least understand the systems I was paying into. Then I reached this stage of life, and I started hearing people say that maybe tens of billions of dollars had been mishandled. Maybe dead people were collecting checks. Maybe one of the biggest frauds in American history had been hiding in plain sight. I will tell you right now, that got my attention fast. I live partly on Social Security. My wife lives partly on Social Security. Many people I know depend on it for half their retirement income or more. So when I heard those claims, I did not hear politics. I heard danger. I heard uncertainty. I heard the sound of older Americans wondering whether the ground under their feet was more fragile than they thought. And honestly, that is why I had to sit down, look at the facts, and figure out what was real, what was exaggerated, and what retirees like me actually need to worry about. I was sitting at my kitchen table when I first came across the claim. I had my black coffee in front of me, my reading glasses in my hand, and my newspaper folded beside me. I remember thinking, did somebody really uncover something enormous here? Or was I hearing one more headline designed to get people angry before breakfast? You see, at my age, I do not have the luxury of treating Social Security like an abstract topic. I do not hear those words and think of cable shows, online fights, or campaign slogans. I think of grocery bills. I think of medicine. I think of widows. I think of retired teachers and police officers and librarians and mechanics who built their whole lives around the promise that this program would still be standing when they needed it. So I started where I always start. I went to the source material. I read reports. I looked at what was being quoted. I compared the big public claim to the underlying numbers. And here's what I didn't understand then. The loudest version of a story is almost never the most accurate version. The loudest version is built to make people react. The accurate version usually takes a little more patience. I was a librarian for nearly 4 decades. Patience is how I learned almost everything that ever mattered. The first thing I found was that there really was a figure being cited. It was not invented out of thin air. The Social Security Administration's Inspector General reported that from fiscal years 2015 through 2022, the agency paid out nearly $8.6 trillion in benefits. Out of that amount, $71.8 billion were classified as improper payments. That number is real. Let me explain. When people hear $71.8 billion, they stop listening to everything after it. I understand why. It sounds outrageous. It sounds criminal. It sounds like the kind of number that should come with handcuffs and flashing lights. But numbers need context, especially big ones. That $71.8 billion was less than 1% of the total benefits paid during that period. I am not saying that to excuse it. I am not saying that because I think waste should be tolerated. I do not. I spent my whole career respecting public money because I knew it came from workers. I am saying it because scale matters. Less than 1% of a giant system can still be a huge amount of money. Both things can be true at once. The amount can be serious, and the headline version can still be misleading. You know what surprised me most? I found that most of those improper payments were not checks going to people who had been dead for 150 years. Most of them were overpayments to living people. That part matters. It changes the story. It does not make the problem disappear, but it changes the story. I didn't know it at the time, but a lot of people were hearing one claim and imagining something much stranger than what the report actually described. I started thinking about all the years I worked around public systems. Errors happen in large systems. They happen in schools, libraries, pension plans, tax offices, insurance files, and benefit programs. Sometimes they come from bad data entry. Sometimes they come from outdated rules. Sometimes they come from changes in law that ordinary people do not fully understand. Sometimes they come from a person receiving more than they should because the formula was wrong, the paperwork was incomplete, or the agency failed to update something in time. That is not the same thing as saying there is no fraud. It is saying that improper payment is broader than outright theft. One example stood out to me because I know many public servants. For years, some people with government pensions had their Social Security calculated differently. Teachers, firefighters, police officers, and others could be affected by those offset rules. Then the rules changed at the end of 2024. Before that change, some people may have received more than they were supposed to receive because they did not understand the offset, or because the system had not fully adjusted things yet. Honestly, I can see how that would happen. Retirement rules are not simple. I am a careful man, and even I have had to sit with a document and read the same paragraph 3 times before I understood what it meant for a monthly check. Now let me get to the part that frightened people the most. The talk about people who were 150, 200, or even 300 years old getting Social Security. That was the piece that spread fast because it sounds absurd. It sounds like proof of collapse. It sounds like the kind of thing that makes a retiree say, "So that is where the money went." But when I looked deeper, I found that the claim did not hold up the way it was being repeated. The issue appears to involve old software, specifically COBOL-based systems. I smiled when I read that, because I am old enough to remember when those systems were treated as the backbone of serious institutions. The way that programming language handles missing or incomplete birth dates can cause some entries to default to a reference point that makes a person appear much older than they really are. In other words, a record can look like it belongs to somebody born more than 150 years ago, even when that does not mean that person is actively receiving benefits. You see, bad data presentation can create a frightening picture, especially when people rush from, "This record looks strange," to, "This proves millions of dead people are cashing checks." That is where I had to slow myself down. I wanted a clean answer. I wanted either a giant scandal or a complete misunderstanding. Real life rarely gives me that kind of simplicity. The cleaner answer, as best as I could tell, was this. Yes, there were improper payments. No, the evidence did not support the idea that tens of millions of dead people were collecting Social Security checks. And honestly, I felt 2 things at once when I reached that point. I felt relieved because the wildest version did not seem true, and I felt uneasy because the real problem was still serious. Let me explain why. Over half of retired Americans rely on Social Security for at least half of their retirement income. I know people like that personally. I have sat in rooms with them. I have listened to them worry out loud. I have watched them do math on envelopes. Some retirees have a pension. Some have savings. Some have rental income or investment income. Many do not. For millions of people, Social Security is not a bonus. It is not a supplement. It is the beam holding up the house. And here is the bigger problem that can get lost when everybody is busy arguing over headlines. The Social Security Trust Fund is under pressure. Every year, trustees report on how long the system can keep paying full scheduled benefits under current conditions. The estimate people keep repeating is about 10 years before the trust fund reserves are depleted. That does not mean checks stop completely. That is important. I need to say that clearly because fear spreads faster than detail. It means that ongoing payroll taxes would likely cover only about 70 to 80% of scheduled benefits. That is the part that should make every retiree sit up straight. I remember when I first worked through that implication. I leaned back in my chair and just stared at the wall for a minute. I was not confused. I was not shocked by the concept. I was struck by the size of it. A 20 to 30% reduction in benefits would not be a small inconvenience. It would not be a budgeting exercise. For many older people, it would be a real blow. It would mean smaller grocery trips, delayed medical care, harder choices, less dignity, more dependence, and more fear. I was scared. I admit that plainly. Not because I believe that exact outcome is guaranteed, but because I know how many lives would be shaken if leaders keep postponing serious solutions. And here's what I didn't understand then. A system can have waste inside it and still face a much bigger structural problem that waste alone will never fix. That is the part so many people miss. Recovering improper payments matters. Tightening administration matters. Stopping fraud matters. I support all of that. I want every dollar guarded carefully. But even if every improper payment vanished tomorrow, that would not solve the long-term financing gap by itself. The improper payments were less than 1% of benefits paid in that period. That is not nothing. But it is not the whole storm either. I have lived long enough to notice a pattern. When a problem is hard, people reach for the explanation that feels easiest. It is easier to believe that one villain, one scandal, or one administrative cleanup will save everything. It is harder to admit that a major national program may require difficult decisions, compromise, and honesty from leaders and voters alike. You see, the big fraud story feels satisfying because it suggests there is hidden money waiting to be recovered, as if somebody just needs to lift the rug and hand it back. Real solutions are usually less dramatic and much more demanding. I do not say that with cynicism. I say it with experience. I worked inside public service. I know that some waste can be cut. I know some systems can be modernized. I know some mistakes can be corrected. I also know that demographics do not bend because a headline got popular. People are living longer. Fewer workers are supporting more retirees. The math does not care about our favorite talking points. So where did I finally land? I landed in a place that may sound less exciting than the opening claim, but it is more useful. I do not believe the evidence supports the idea that some enormous hidden army of dead people is draining Social Security through active checks. I do believe that improper payments happened, and that the amount was large enough to deserve scrutiny, reform, and accountability. I also believe that retirees should not let that issue distract them from the deeper threat, which is the future strength of the program itself. I had to ask myself a personal question after all this. What would I tell somebody my age who feels overwhelmed by these stories? I would tell that person to do two things at once. First, stay alert. Read beyond the headline. Look for source reports. Do not surrender your judgment to whichever public figure sounds the most certain. Second, prepare your own household as if government promises may someday arrive later, smaller, or more complicated than expected. I hate saying that, but I believe it. I built my own retirement around layers for exactly that reason. Pension, savings, investments, real estate, Social Security. I never wanted one pillar carrying the whole roof. Not everybody had that chance. I know that. I never confuse my preparation with moral superiority. Some people raised children alone. Some people dealt with illness. Some people earned too little to save much. Some people trusted a system they had every reason to trust. That is why this issue matters so much. When wealthy people talk casually about benefit cuts, I wonder whether they have ever sat across from somebody who truly cannot absorb one. I have. That memory stays with me. Honestly, I do not think most retirees care about winning an argument. I think most retirees want the same basic thing I want. I want the truth without the circus. I want waste reduced. I want fraud punished. I want records cleaned up. I want old systems updated. And I want adults in power to face the long-term problem before it becomes a crisis that lands on the backs of people who are too old to start over. That is why I wanted to talk about this. I did not want fear to do the thinking for me. I did not want outrage to replace facts. I wanted to know whether the biggest fraud in history had really been uncovered. My answer, after looking at the material, is no, not in the way that claim was being sold. But I also cannot say, nothing to see here, because that would be dishonest. There was real waste. There were real improper payments. There is real risk ahead. All three of those things can be true together. I remember one afternoon after reading through all of this, I took a walk through Saratoga Springs and kept turning the issue over in my mind. I was not thinking about billionaires or politicians by then. I was thinking about a retired school secretary I once knew who kept a notepad beside her phone and wrote every expense in pencil. I was thinking about a widower from church who told me, in a quiet voice, that one unexpected dental bill had thrown off his whole month. I was thinking about my own wife, Catherine, and the way we planned carefully for decades because we never wanted to be cornered in old age. You see, I know what preparation can do, but I also know its limits. I can prepare for market swings. I can prepare for repairs. I can prepare for inflation better than most. I cannot prepare the whole country's retirement system by myself, and that realization carries a weight to it. When I brought this up at dinner, I told Catherine that the headline had been louder than the report. I told her the money issue was real, but the dead people story did not seem to be what many were saying. She looked at me the way she has looked at me for more than 50 years, very steady, very clear. And she said that the truth is usually less theatrical and more important. Honestly, that stayed with me. I do not need theater from a retirement system. I need competence. I need honesty. I need enough seriousness from the people running it that ordinary older Americans do not spend every month wondering whether the next promise will also come with an asterisk. And let me say one more thing. I do not think I have earned the right to complain about these issues unless I also tell younger people to pay attention now. I waited for nothing in my financial life. I saved early. I invested steadily. I learned the rules as best I could. I delayed Social Security to strengthen my own benefit. I built other income streams because I never wanted panic to make decisions for me. I want that same calm preparation for anyone listening, whether retirement is 1 year away or 30 years away. I would rather face a hard truth early than a harder truth late. I have learned that anxiety grows in darkness, but clarity grows when I read, ask questions, compare claims, and refuse to let outrage do my homework. That habit has protected me more than once. So I will leave you with this. I am 80 years old, and I have learned that the most dangerous stories are often the ones that contain just enough truth to make the exaggeration feel safe. That is why I keep reading. That is why I keep checking. That is why I keep trying to separate the shocking claim from the lasting lesson. And the lasting lesson here for me is simple. I need to pay attention not only to what was lost, but to what may happen next if the deeper problem stays untreated. If this helped me think more clearly, maybe it helped you too. If you are retired, close to retirement, or helping a parent understand all this, I would really like to hear how you see it. I read the comments because I learn from other people's lived experience, not just from reports. If this gave you something useful, give the video a like so more retirees can find it. If you want more calm, fact-based conversations from somebody who actually depends on these systems and takes them seriously, subscribe and stay with me. I am not here to shout. I am here to sort through what matters. And if you keep watching with me, I will keep doing my best to bring you the facts, the context, and the part nobody should ignore. What all of this means for our real lives.